Okay. Our greeters, Tom and Annette Backus. And as Tom told me, this is a move for the economy. They also did the goodies we get. And there's an awful lot of them out here, you know. It doesn't look like we've made much of a dent in it yet. Nobody's getting it. Okay, and let's not forget that the coffee is made by Joyce.
Yay, Joyce!
Okay, Barb, do we have any visitors?
Give me a moment. We have Dan and Betty on hand.
We have Dan and Betty Monahan returning. They were here just about a month ago. So thank you for coming. They're guests with Mary Beth.
That's twice.
And then we have repeat, and I don't have my cheat sheet in front of me. Here in this fourth row we have, I don't have my sheet ready. Lauren and Armida, and they return. This is their second time. They were here last week.
Okay, we got a couple birthdays today. Ann Wade.
Ah, right. Well, here she is, right here. Happy birthday.
And Sharon Curry. And he says he's going to take you to a nice dinner. So don't let him off that.
Wow.
And we don't have any anniversaries for this week. So, we got any joys or concerns? Roger.
I'd just like to say thank you to Contemporary Forum class for the turnout Wednesday Night Live. We had a good group of servers, and we had a really good crowd. And I want to thank you again for staying and helping clean up too. That's important too.
Anybody else?
I spoke last week about taking this honor flight, and I took it.
Oh, did you?
And it was really, well, it's overwhelming, really, is what it is. And it was very joyous, and it was a wonderful thing, and I really enjoyed it.
Great.
I'm so glad you had that experience.
Thank you.
I have a note here from the Wise family, and they're thanking us for hosting the reception and the following memorial service at their home. So, hang this on the board back there.
Also, I don't know if everybody noticed, I didn't until the service was almost over, that flowers were placed in Thanksgiving. Appreciate. Did you hear my ear talking? The flowers were placed last Sunday on the altar in appreciation for our Contemporary Forum class. And the way the flowers are announced is bothering me, because how many times have you gone to worship and you've never really looked to see? You didn't realize on the very back page, at the very bottom, there is this announcement. But just wanted you to know if you missed them.
It's been that way ever since I've been here.
Well, they need to change it.
Okay, you're in charge of change.
That's what she does with me all the time.
I didn't think she was having any luck with that. Okay. Well, let's see, this morning, James Shepard is going to pray, and then Ken, you can do the lesson.
everybody to take home and read and bring back or do what they want. But about the subject we're talking about today. Thank you. Well, I would like for you to pray for me as I try to do this, because it is a sensitive subject. And I'm sure there still may be some different opinions, but I appreciate your attention. It's an important issue because our church and the church conference in February is going to be about gender issues. The gay and lesbian have been, according to our discipline, have been forbidden to do, well, to join or to marry or to not involved, and that's what this is about. One of the choices, which is a bishop's choice, was to make it completely open to be members and all. We need to study the issue before we vote, and there's a couple of books about lesbian and gay issues that you might want to look at if you haven't. But the gay and lesbian issue has been with us since history was recorded. And Judy, I've been working with a PFLAG, we call it, parents and friends of lesbians and gays. Meet once a month. We have good attendance. It's not always the same people, but it's people that come often because they just found that their grandson is gay or somebody's gay in their family and they don't know how to handle it. And this is good for discussion because there are other gays there, and there's a good way to encourage the right kind of reception to this. But some kids that come out will have problems at home. They're not really welcome. When the family can't understand it, but it's something that I think through the gestation, while the baby is being developed in the womb, it's soaked in some hormones, and at different stages, if this is not even, well, it affects the way they feel. They come out male or female, but they may feel opposite or different. So people wind up sometimes disowning their child. Some think that can change and try to send them to religion school or to get them to convert. But they found that doesn't work. I mean, there's no answer. It's even outlawed now. Some wind up considering suicide, and some of the kids are persecuted by their friends or other kids at school. So have a hard life in our society as it is now. So you may think that lifestyle is consciously chosen, but it's not. We have to believe that not a single person would choose such a hard life. It's not. I've never seen one that would come to our meetings that liked what they were dealt. But most are able to deal with it. The main thing is they want acceptance and they want a place in society. And we're supposed to be encouragers. They're nice people. There's a lesbian couple on our block that have lived there a year or so, and we've enjoyed being their friends, and they invited us a few months ago to their wedding. Because they've been together for a long time, but they were married in their home. So I'd like to pray. God help us to understand and accept the differences of men and women of multiple cultures, with different languages and colors and gender preferences. Help us to love as you love, and may we judge not that we be not judged. May our thoughts and actions be acceptable in your sight. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Well, thank you, Dr. James, for your sincerity. It's always so touching. As I was coming down to the class a while ago, Scott Fennell asked me to stress a matter that's actually in our bulletin this morning. It's the meeting that they're having on September the 23rd, How to Survive Caregiving with Sanity and a Sense of Humor. And this gentleman, Jim Comer, is supposed to be quite good, and the church is pretty excited about this particular session, because caregiving is something, let's face it, we're doing an awful lot these days, are we not? There's so many of us who are caregivers or who are going to be the recipients of caregiving. So that no doubt will be a good meeting. Well, before we get started this morning, two of our class members want to bring something to our attention. Jim Montgomery, I'm wondering if you might comment first.
I like to watch Jeopardy. I don't know if the rest of you do, but Wednesday they had something that really threw me. One of the questions was asked of a contestant, what is the third book of the Bible? And the answer given was the Book of Mormon. And it just threw me. So I don't know if anybody else has ever heard that or not, but I don't believe it. I think it should be Book for Mormons. But anyway, has anybody ever heard of them claiming that to be the third book of the Bible?
No.
Only those who saw the Broadway production.
Okay.
Kelly.
Well, I wouldn't let that disturb you. You know what the Bible is, and you know the books of the Bible. Gail, picking up on the last two lessons of James Asbury, has a treat for us this morning, I think. Gail, would you come, please?
Well, after that wonderful presentation last week, thank you, about the meeting in Maryland, just outside of Baltimore, where Methodism in America was officially established. Suddenly, on the way home, I thought, gosh, I've got something in the back of my mind that rang a bell. And so I quickly began to think about it for several days, and I found information about the house where all of this took place. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the family, briefly about the family who lived there and why this particular house was chosen. Now, I had a copy of the room at Winterthur Museum where this painting of the house hangs, and it's on the 4th floor if you ever go to Winterthur, in Blackwell Parlor, and it's by an unknown artist. The house is known as Perry Hall, but by the mid-18th century it was a very strong idea in the colonies, as it was in England, that if you could afford to do it, you had the money, you could escape the city perhaps. The cities there were full of diseases and dirt. And you could perhaps become a gentleman farmer and have a country house. And so that is what happened to a man in Baltimore, a wealthy merchant. His name was Harry Dorsey Gough, G-O-U-G-H. I guess that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure. Now, he had purchased a house just prior to the Revolutionary War in 1774, known as Perry Hall, and it was located, if you're familiar with Maryland, on Route 1, which was the main artery. Today it would be known as Route 1. The main artery north of Baltimore, about 12 miles north of Baltimore. It was a large stone house, but with a very fine prospect. And he added, though, to this house 2 wings. And I thought this was kind of interesting for this time period, 1770s. One wing contained an elaborate marble-lined bathhouse with a pool, a hot room, and a steam room in the Roman fashion. The other wing contained a room large enough to be used as a chapel. And Mrs. Gough had converted to Methodism. It seated 75 people. Can you imagine a wing in your house that seated that many people? And shortly after the war was over, this wealthy farmer had it highly ornamented, and even George Washington used the same man to ornament his new room there at Mount Vernon. So for Mr. Gough, his passion was horse racing. He had inherited money from England, and he also was a wealthy merchant, as I mentioned. And he had one of the fine racehorses of the period. That was a very favorite sport, not only with the local people who lived in the rural areas, and most of course, our country was rural at that time. But he too converted to Methodism. And so he began to turn his attention more to other pursuits, and that was advanced methods in farming. And he imported fine Persian sheep, and he imported cattle. So in December of 1784, Perry Hall was used for the meeting between Francis Asbury, the only Methodist missionary who stayed in America during the Revolution, and Thomas Coke, as we learned last week, who had arrived from England with a new group of missionaries. They met there for 10 days at Perry Hall, and they planned what was known as the Christmas Conference, at which the the American Methodist Episcopal Church then was organized, and Francis Asbury was ordained as the first superintendent. So in the painting, it shows not only the house and with the 2 wings, but it shows the family. It shows Mr. Gough on his horse, one of his famous horses, and it shows his wife and her daughter and grandchildren down in the foreground. So if you have a chance after class, you might like to take a look, and that can more firmly establish in your mind where this all happened, just north of Baltimore, about 12 miles north of Baltimore. The house still stands. Portions of the house still stand today, but there was a terrible fire in the 1830s, and much of it was destroyed. So if you drove by there, you wouldn't recognize it from this painting. But just a little trivia.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm not with this.
Well, thank you, Gail. If that's trivia, it's very interesting trivia. I appreciate it very much. And for those of you who are still visiting our class or new members, I want you to know that this is the contemporary forum class. And so therefore, yeah, you have a person who's somewhat of a teacher. But more than that, anyone in the class who wants to speak can certainly do so. Mary, do you want to speak for us this morning?
Yes, I do.
Good.
I want to add to that story. Gail mentioned that this gentleman's passion was horse racing.
Yes.
The story that I have heard, this was back several years ago. My grandfather and grandmother that lived in Moody, Texas, they were Baptist, they went to a horse race on Sunday in Waco. And they got thrown out of the Baptist church in Moody, and that's how they became Methodist.
What a wonderful story. Well, you know, it is true in early America. In fact, for some time, horse racing was like football to those people. Horse racing was a big, I don't know if they would have used the word sport, but that's really what it was. And the Morgan horse, you know, was very, very prominent in early America and won its share of the races, I understand. Well, okay, it's time for me to be a little serious now and to get out to this lesson. I am reminded of a very outstanding minister, Reverend Brooks. This is actually a story that my dear wife has informed me of, and it is a meaningful story, but he stood up before his congregation and told them, he says, now next Sunday I am going to be preaching about lying, telling lies, and I hope to purge you all of such things as that. After all, he says, you know, one of the 10 Commandments says that you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And so I'm going to be preaching on lying, and I want all of you to read the chapter of Mark 17, because if you read that chapter in the Bible and then you come hear my sermon, you'll get more of the sermon. So then he preached his sermon. So the next Sunday came and he stood up and said, okay, how many of you read that 17th chapter last week as I asked you to do it? Well, a large number of people did so. And so, you know, wow, that's really something. That's amazing, especially in view of the fact that the book of Mark only has 16 chapters. So, I will begin my sermon. Thank you, Dixie. She just provides all sorts of little nuggets for me. In fact, she is the inspiration of today's lesson. In fact, I want to tell you something, that today's lesson goes right along with the church service this morning. And there was absolutely, I hate to use the word, there was absolutely no collusion. I had no idea that this was what, even the song that we did this morning, the same one. But last Saturday, a week back from yesterday, well, we went out to eat. Bob's Catfish is a funny little place, but they do have good catfish. And so we went over there to eat, and we were driving around out in San Gabriel Park area. And Dixie said, you know, she says, I am happy today. I thought to myself, isn't it strange to hear a person say something like that? the truth is, she had really been ill for about 3 weeks. She was under the care of 2 different doctors for 2 very different ailments, and they were just filling her with medicines, one especially hard to keep up with. Had to keep a diary almost daily. And so she had all these medicines coursing through her body, and of course the condition that she had. And so sure enough, for about 3 weeks, she just wasn't feeling good. And so finally, she was feeling good on that Saturday, and just said so. She said, I'm not only feeling good, but when I look at things, she says, I am really happy today. Now I thought, wow, that's really something. Several years ago, actually, I actually taught a lesson on joy, which was the topic of the service, the worship service today. And so I started thinking about happiness. I suppose that Abe Lincoln had it pretty well right when he said, well, folks are usually about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Well, I dare say that that's just about the truth. If you want to be happy, well, perhaps you can be. If you want to be a perennial sad sack, well, you perhaps can do that too. Happiness or unhappiness, if you think about it, it can be viewed as a disposition, as one's temperament. Some people, I do think, tend to have sunnier dispositions and temperaments than others. A mental framework, perhaps, or a state of mind. Those people who are happy, we think in terms of such words as pleasure, contentment. Joy is very close to it. According to the dictionary, a little different, not much. Gladness, cheerfulness, those words. And if we think of unhappiness, the opposite, we think of such words as sad, pain, dejection, unpleasantness, ill-tempered. And to illustrate those things, Dixie, I have asked Dixie to do a reprise of something she did several years ago. I think that you will understand what the opposite of happiness is. Dixie.
This is called the croaker. Once on the edge of a pleasant pool, under the bank where it was dark and cool, where the bushes over the waters hung, and the rushes nodded and the grasses swung, just where the creek flowed out of the fog, there lived a grumpy and a mean old frog, who would sit all day in the mud and soak, and just do nothing but croak and croak. Till a blackbird hollered, I say, you know, what's the matter down there below? Are you in trouble or pain or what? And old frog says, mine is an awful lot. Nothing but dirt and mud and slime for me to look at all the time. It's a dirty world, the old fool spoke. Croakety, 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 croak. But you're looking down, the blackbird said. Look at the blossoms overhead. Look at the lovely summer skies. And look at the bees and the butterflies. Look up, old feller. Well, bless my soul, you're looking down in a muskrat hole. But still, with a gurgling, sobbing choke, the blamed old critter would only croak. And a wise old turtle, who boarded deer, says to the blackbird, friend, see here, don't shed no tears over him, for he is low down just because he wants to be. He's one of them kind of chumps that's glad to be so miserable and sad. And I'll tell you something that ain't no joke. Don't waste your sorrow on folks that croak.
I really suppose this lesson today can be dedicated to my dear wife. Well, when I think about, by the way, as we move through this lesson, this is a lesson that is ripe for discussion, and so anyone who has a comment to make, I hope that you will. But if you think about happiness, family and friends help an awful lot, don't they? They're almost the basis of our happiness, I think. Not always, of course. Sometimes families and friends can do just the exact opposite. As I think about mine, I've lived a few years, and I can see both of those, but for the most part, very, very positive. Do we have any thoughts to be shared about the happiness or the lack of happiness due to family and friends? Okay. Oh, wonderful. Annette.
Last week, when you were teaching Asbury, I was just full of happiness. The reason I was thinking is that one year, we moved all over the country, of course, and one year we moved to Little Rock. And at that time, we were Baptist, and Bill and Hillary had already moved at the same time we were moving. They moved out to the White House, and we moved into Little Rock. So consequently, we did not want to go to that Baptist church because the one we liked so much was all the people were coming in because Bill Clinton was now in the White House, and we thought, well, that's not really the place we need. And people kept telling us that they ran into us to go to Asbury Methodist Church. And it was absolutely the happiest church I've ever been in. They were real strong people, loved each other, didn't say anything negative about anyone did you ever hear in that church. And so I just really felt like that church, and when we left, they gave me a picture that they had etched of the church, and it's on an easel, and I still look up at them and smile all the time, and they make me happy.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. That's kind of the way I feel about this class. I feel that most of the friends that I have in Georgetown are in this class. And in fact, I feel really very close, very friendly to everyone in this class. And I think that many of you feel the same way. But yeah, we do remember churches, don't we, that were very special, and we remember them with great fondness. There are those people that when you mention happiness, I know one, in fact, who would say that happiness is the best example of happiness would be munching down on Reese's chocolate caramel blizzards at Dairy Queen. I know someone who might think that, but in fact, friends and family, of course, are the source of great happiness. We, of course, do realize that happiness is affected by circumstances. As an example, health. When you're in pain and when you are facing surgery, it's really kind of hard to be described as being happy. Happy might be 6 weeks afterwards and everything goes well and the therapy is over and then you're okay. But seriously, you know, many, if not most of us in this room know what I'm talking about from the standpoint of health. Health certainly does affect our happiness. Now, I want to spend just a little bit of time here on the term happiness in the Bible. After all, this is Sunday school. We are in a church. This morning, our pastor read a scripture from the book of Psalms, and I would like to read one briefly too. Happy are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord, is in the Lord, their God. Yes, happy are those of us whose hope is in God. Belief in God, a personal God, not one who is far away beyond the clouds, is the basis of our happiness. I think it's interesting when we look at the Beatitudes of Matthew 5. Well, we're familiar with the language that says, as an example, just to pick one of the Beatitudes, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. We're accustomed to that. But if you pick up the New Common Bible, the one that we have upstairs in our sanctuary, it doesn't say blessed, it says happy. Happy are the people who have pure hearts, because they will see God. And every one of the Beatitudes has the word happy instead of blessed. So I think that is interesting. Now, Jesus himself is recorded in John 13:17. He is at the altar there on the last night, the night of the Lord's Supper, before he is to go out into the Garden of Gethsemane. He is there at the beginning of this meeting with his apostles in the upper room, and doing what? Well, he's washing their feet. By the way, did you know that there are certain religious groups in this country that still wash feet? And so here was Jesus washing the feet of his apostles. And he says to them, and he's already told them other things that they should remember. He's trying to get them to remember the teachings along the trails that they have walked together. But this is the one that he has most in mind. And he says, well, you know this. You know that this is what you should be doing. And since you know that this is what you do it, then happiness will come to you if you do it. Yes, stop talking about it and doing it. Jesus has placed before us all sorts of things that we should be doing in our lives to bring forth his kingdom, the kingdom of God on earth. We should be doing those things. And if we do those things, what will happen? We will be happy. Yes, we will. Now, also in John 10:10, one of my favorites, Jesus is using some figurative language, and he is comparing himself to a gate out in a field, a gate that houses, if you will, or fences in sheep, his sheep. And he says basically that whoever enters into his gate, that he will let them in and out throughout the day for being able to eat fresh grass in the pasture. They may come in and out throughout the day, but it's his gate. And so at the end of the day, they're brought inside and the gate is closed. And so he is talking about this, and he doesn't use the word happiness, but it means the same thing. He says, I came so that they, the sheep, us, in other words, that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. More abundantly. That's what we're talking about this morning. Jesus is talking about that you may have life more abundantly by being a follower of His. Now, I've given a lot of thought this week in thinking about happiness, thinking about Jesus. How is Jesus presented in the four Gospels? Would like some comments to think about how Jesus is presented in the four Gospels. Just in general, as you think back about Jesus walking through the four Gospels, how is He presented? Any thoughts?
I think unconditional loving,
Okay.
unconditional love and actions that speak that I love without condition.
How
God
true.
loves without condition.
Yes, without condition. Thank goodness for that. Okay, a very good point. It's so true.
Forgiving.
Yes.
Well, Jesus' insightfulness into all of the folks that he came upon, he immediately knew where they were coming from. He was insightful.
Okay, thank you. He was very insightful. He understood
Yes.
what was happening. The thing that I have in mind, though, is a little different from these two excellent comments. And you may not agree with me on this, but when I think of the four Gospels, I immediately realize these are not biographies. They're Gospels, that is to say, a Gospel is saying that is presenting Jesus to the world as good news, the good news of Jesus Christ. They're all evangelists. These four are evangelists. They're not truly objective, extremely subjective, with a point of view, and they pursue it strongly. And your two comments are perfectly right within that. But they're not biographies. There has been a terrific quest in the last, well, actually going back to Schweitzer quite a few years, in looking at the historical Jesus, which is to say, trying to look at Jesus, the Son of Man, not Jesus, the Son of God, but Jesus, the Son of Man, looking at Him and trying to understand Him. Although I think many writers in that school have missed the boat, some have made real contributions to our understanding of Jesus. I'm looking at it right now from that point of view, if you will allow me. And as I did look at it, I must say that the Jesus that's presented subjectively in the Gospels is kind of a one-sided person. In other words, the only thing that's presented by these writers is Jesus at work, trying to convert people, trying to help people who are ill, arguing against the Pharisees of the religious establishment of the day. And in other words, that's what they showed Jesus doing, dying on the cross and so on. But it's interesting to fall back and ask yourself the question, surely though Jesus the man wasn't just about the business of God all the time, what kind of a person would he have been as a man?
I think he had a sense of humor.
Okay, yes, it has been commented that he did have a sense of humor, and sometimes when I'm thinking of one example, which I won't get off into, but we misinterpret that scripture because we don't understand that it is his sense of humor. But it is very rare, though, to see that. It's very rare to see that. Now, as an example, well, I'm getting to something here. It's this. If you go through the New Testament, you will be interested to see how many times Jesus was at a dinner party. or if he wasn't at a dinner party, he was talking about a dinner party. By that I mean to say that he was at a party with other people, sitting around a low table and eating. One of the first things that happens, as an example, in the book of Matthew, is that after Matthew is called, time always passes too fast. Well, Matthew has been a tax collector and obviously has a little money, and so since he has been called by Jesus to follow him and he's accepted that, he's decided to give Jesus a big dinner party. And not only Jesus, but those few people who have already, decided to follow Jesus. There are already 5 or 6 of them. And so he throws a big dinner party, not only for Jesus and his few apostles, but all of his friends. Hey, well, let's come on into my house and we're just going to put all these tables up. We're going to have wine and we're going to have food and we're going to enjoy ourselves. And how many times as you read through the New Testament you see that? This is an example why many of the critics of Jesus accused him of being a glutton. He was accused of gluttony. I had always thought of Jesus as the son of a carpenter and, therefore a pretty rugged build and, a person who builds buildings. But it could be as he left that and moved on out into his life and enjoyed all these get-togethers with people, having dinners and so on. It could be, for all we know, and I hope that you don't think that I'm being silly about this, but maybe he developed, a little waistline there. Have you ever thought about the historical Jesus, the Son of Man? Well, it's an interesting thought anyway. At any rate, that perhaps that this is the way that Jesus found some happiness. The last time that Jesus, just about as I recall, the last time Jesus did anything at all, he was out on the beach. His apostles, they didn't know he was there. They were out there in the boat trying to catch some fish, and it was very early in the morning, still kind of dark. And he was up on the beach cooking some fish and had some bread there. He would basically say, hey fellas, come on in here. And he's already resurrected. This is his post-resurrected body. And so again, it's Jesus over some food. He's cooking some fish for his friends. Well, and so it's just an interesting thing to think about. Now, concepts and observations. I looked up the word love in my concordance. Now, not lovely or loving, no other form, just love. And it is listed in the Bible 191 times. That is a lot. 191 times. Takes up 2.5, 3 pages of my concordance. That's one of the central words in the entire Bible is what? The love of God. And thank goodness we have the love of God in our lives. Because some of us, at least I'm looking at myself, if it weren't for the love of God, I don't know where I would be. That is one of the basic concepts and observations that we could give about happiness. That God Almighty truly does single you out as an individual and loves you. That is the cause of happiness. To the point of almost having a hard time believing that, but it's true. It's biblical. It's our faith. The other word that I was thinking of was the word grace. Thank goodness for the grace of God that brings us happiness. The writer Paul in the book of Romans, which talks about grace forever, makes the statement that so that just as sin exercised dominion in death, grace might exercise dominion when, through justification leading to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Because of the grace of God, we not only have life here and now, but we are facing life eternally with God. Again, that is our faith. So, the third idea I have is several Sundays ago I preached a lesson on this idea of carrying your cross. And if you recall, I was pretty serious about that, and in fact I am serious about that. All of us carry our cross. But you know something? Just about the happiest people I know are people who are cross bearers. That is, they bear the cross of Christ as they do tasks within the church. I'm looking at Julie back here, who I heard sing in the choir this morning, and who gave her pathetic Sunday school teacher a book to help his mind. As we do things for the church and in the name of God, well, it seems like to me, as cross bearers, that's what brings so many people happiness. Yes. And so, have you ever felt joy and happiness as a result of having done something for Christ and for His church? Well, of course you have. And you know what I'm talking about. That is the source of happiness. Well, do we have any more comments here? We have just a couple of minutes, not many, but a couple, on the subject of happiness. We do. Wonderful. There is a cross bearer right there.
It stands to me that when Christ said, I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly, and my joy will never go away, because I know whatever happens, He has given me life and life abundant.
Thank you so much. I love that word too. That pretty well says it. I believe, to conclude, that God truly wants us to enjoy our lives on this big, beautiful world, and to experience happiness and the good life, and which is, if you think about it, just a taste, a hint of what will follow in the glorious happiness of heaven. We do have another comment. Wonderful.
Pardon me. I just wanted to say, I think, like in my experience, I think some people think that God doesn't want them, like they're not allowed to be happy. Like they have to operate from a place of guilt in order to please God. And I think that they don't really, that they're not really trusting God, because God really does want us to be happy while we're here on earth. Because to your point, serving God is very rewarding. But I know a lot of people who just don't allow themselves, kind of like looking at the glass half full or half empty. It's your choice, but there are so many things, and I wish a lot of people would allow themselves to really be happy, because it's okay. That's all. That's been my observation.
Well, thank you for that observation. The word that I appreciate your using is the word choice. We do have conscious choices, don't we?
Yep.
Well, wonderful. Guy over here.
You started off this lesson with that joke about lying, and it made me think back when I was 15 and I zipped past this church. I'm pretty sure it was Baptist, and they had these ornate stone whatnot where they would put in, thoughtful sayings or whatever. And I read it. Probably took me no more than 2.5 seconds, and I just zipped by, and it imprinted on me, and it was the cobwebs of lies soon become the cables of deceit. And that stuck with me for, ever since.
Say that again.
The cobwebs of lies soon become the cables of deceit.
And it's remarkable that you remembered that after all these years.
I'm not lying.
I have absolutely no doubt. Now, before you leave, if you're interested, come up and look at Gail's book on the home of American Methodist. And Gail, I want to thank you for bringing this. Let's have a wonderful
We have a lot of good refreshments up here. Come by.